My name is Lisa Kokin, and my piece in From Generation to Generation is called Inventory. Inventory is an installation of more or less 1,000 rectangles of gut, which is also referred to as sausage casings, into which are encased small objects. I made inventory after visiting Buchenwald concentration camp in 1996. And the reason I went to Buchenwald was that I was invited to dedicate an installation that they purchased, which was called Remembrance. That was also made out of gut, and it consisted of 10 concentration camp jackets and 10 bags that sat underneath the jackets. And the 51st anniversary of the liberation of the camp took place in April. So they invited me to go, and I went, and it was the first time I'd ever been to a concentration camp. And the museum on the site of the camp had recently been redone after the fall of the Berlin Wall. And the museum had what you would typically expect a Holocaust museum to have: many photos, lots of documentation, lots of text, which, I went through. But then I got to this vitrine that had dozens, maybe a couple of hundred tiny items that had been retrieved from the site after the war. And it was that vitrine that went right through me. I mean, all the photos, all the documentation, it was terrifying and moving and horrific, but somehow the sight of those tiny little objects, buttons, hearing aids, little scraps of fabric, that to me spoke volumes about what had occurred there. So when I got home, I decided I wanted to continue using gut. Gut is kind of an odd thing to use. First of all, it is made from hogs. So there's this whole thing of the kosher, not kosher thing, and then talking about the Holocaust. But the aesthetic qualities of the gut are so amazing in terms of how light reflects through it that I knew I had to keep using it. And I just began a series of pieces using tiny little objects, which I had gathered already. I had a whole bunch of objects, but I had to get more. So I went to flea markets. I tried to select objects that resonated with or was similar to the objects I saw in the museum. That wasn't hard to do because they're commonplace objects. And that was why it was so powerful, was because they're so easily recognizable. Everybody has them, and they are attached. In my looking at that exhibition and that part of the exhibition, I could imagine the people whose jackets those buttons had been attached to, and the lives that had been lived and the lives that had been extinguished there. So I did not curate heavily. When I had a button, I put it in the gut. When I, tore a piece of fabric, I just stuck it in the gut. It was not like a heavily intellectual. It was kind of more of a visceral connection. I grew up in the shadow of the Holocaust. My family was not directly connected because my grandparents had emigrated from Eastern Europe before that. But when I say that I grew up in the shadow of the Holocaust, I mean that I grew up feeling that the world was not a safe place. It was not a safe place for Jews. And I got that message loud and clear. Remember, I got a Star of David. Somebody gave me a Star of David, and my mother said, it's great to be proud to be a Jew, but you don't have to advertise it. So, the message I got from that was, yeah, it's okay to be proud to be a Jew, but don't broadcast it, because they could come knocking at the door at any moment. I mean, as a small child, I really internalized this sort of free-floating fear and anxiety in the world. But I didn't it was too young to really know where that came from. When I started doing this work about the Holocaust, that's when I realized that I could address what I wanted to address. I didn't have to, was kind of heaped on me as a child. So I feel like it's a way to investigate and process. And, I hesitate to use the word heal because I didn't feel that, I guess I was wounded in a way, but I see it more as a way of working through things and talking about my experience. And if somebody else can relate, that's great. And if they can't, I've done what I can do, and it's not my intent to try to educate so much. But I feel that when I did make this work, and when I did go to Buchenwald, it kind of closed the cycle in a way for me of wondering about my relationship to it and how I grew up. And for me, it does make me feel better when I can create things, and especially when I can create something that that tells a story that is important to me.